If I may ask all other participants, please to mute yourselves so that we allow only the speaker to be the one being heard. So in terms of our program today, I'm giving the opening remarks, and then straight after that, we will invite James Flynn, who is the Chief Technical Officer and co-founder of US Import Agent Incorporated. Some of you may remember him from a session that we had earlier in April. And then after that, we'll invite Janet Forrest, who is a specialist consultant who is working with the USAID TradeHub, who knows AGOA and has been working on AGOA issues across Africa and the US for the last couple of years. And after that, we'll then open it up and have a panel discussion where Janet and James are going to be joined by Sim Dube and Kos Mamunze, who are going to be answering specific questions and deliberating on those particular topics. And then we open it up for all participants to share their questions and their comments. So I would like at this point to invite you, as the presentations are being given, please take the time to put your questions in the chat boxes so that the questions can be harvested and made available to the panelists for responding when we get to the right session. After that, we'll then have the next steps and the closing remarks. So without much ado, let me invite Francis Fraser, who is our portfolio manager for South Africa, who has also been leading the coordination of this particular webinar, to come in and take it away for us. Francis, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Golden. Welcome, everyone. This is Francis Fraser, and I'm at our office today, which is a nice change from the four walls of my study. Feels like I'm going on holiday. I would like to first share some information with you on who registered to participate today. We've got a broad group of people from across the 8 countries that we work in. So as Golden mentioned, we focus on exports from our region to the US, but those 8 countries are the priority for us in terms of our directive from USAID. So thank you very much for a nice spread there, particularly well done to Botswana. Then if we move on to the different gender breakdown, again, the ladies are in the lead. Nice to see an empowered group here today. Then we have quite a mixture in terms of the different types of firms that we work with and the different roles that they play in the ecosystem. Predominance of food today, so I think you're in the right space. I think you'll enjoy a lot of information on the food safety verification program that we're going to share, amongst other guidance around utilizing AGOA in that space. We will also cover the other sectors as well. And then just in terms of the type of organizations, a big predominance of companies that are focused on exporting or considering exporting to the US, and then also a number of our partners from different trade promotion service providers and trade and investment promotion agencies. Thank you for joining us. I see the Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I see SAFLEC. I think Wesco and TIKZN are with us. So just to mention a few of the important partners we work with. Thank you. So let me move on to introducing you to the real 2 treats of the day. The first is James. James, some of you may have met in April in one of our first webinars that we ran. James is he brings 25 years of experience in 2 quite different fields somehow, food safety as well as software development, but he uses his brilliant technical skills to make sure that if you are part of the US import agent client base, that your records are available to the Food and Drug Administration if they ever do an inspection. And James is going to share with us some really nitty-gritty information around the food safety verification program, but also some of the trends that are emerging in terms of the Food and Drug Administration at the moment in light of COVID-19 and the important role that they are playing in terms of protecting the American citizens. Then our second speaker is Janet Forrest. I think several of you have met Janet in the past few months. Janet is doing some consultancy work for the USAID TradeHub to develop an AGOA toolkit. And the toolkit will be used by anyone who is keen to develop their export knowledge to take advantage of AGOA. And so in the process of developing the toolkit, Janet met several of you to inform the positioning of the toolkit. Janet brings 40 years of customs law experience from the US. She's worked for USAID as a senior trade advisor. She's worked in private practice, and she's advised many developing economies in terms of their customs laws. So we're in really good hands today. There will be some information that some of you have heard before, so it will be a good refresh, and there'll be some extra and new insights and information on some of the trends. I will introduce Koz and Sim in a bit more detail after our speakers have had the chance to share their information with you. And with that, I will ask Tapiso to give screen sharing rights to James and hand over to him. Welcome, James.
Thank you very much, Francis. Let me share my screen and start the video and so on. Special makeup and effects and everything all out of the way. Thank you very much for inviting me today to present on the Foreign Supplier Verification Programme and what that means. What I would like to do today is to, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of echo. Someone's not muted themselves. So, if everyone could please mute their audio, thank you. So this session today is focusing on FDA compliance, inspections and detentions, and understanding the requirements of FDA and some insights into what's happening around COVID-19. So I'm looking to try and bring a bit of fun to what is sometimes a dry subject. But I'm going to start with what the Food Safety Modernisation Act is. And as part of this, Carlos here, our friendly FDA inspector, is going to guide us through the story of how all this works and so on. So the Food Safety Modernisation Act is often called FSMA, and it comprises actually of around 7 different rules, but 5 are particularly relevant to food manufacturers, processors, packers, growers, and so on. And the 2 really important ones are the preventive controls for human and animal food, which applies to US facilities, and the Foreign Supplier Verification Programme, which applies to foreign-based facilities. There are also 3 others that you need to be aware of, because these could well come up, and intentional adulteration rule is one of them. And you're going to see more about that in the coming year or 2, because it's really just starting to come into force. Also, sanitary transport of human and animal food applies to both domestic and foreign facilities, as does produce safety for human and animal food, which is much more targeted at farms, for example. But FSMA, as it's often called in the US, for the Food Safety Modernization Act, is the single biggest shake-up of food safety laws in the US in over 70 years. So it really is a big deal. It's such a big deal that the law was passed in 2011, and it's going to take over 15 years to implement all of it. But we're a fair way through that already, being in 2020 at the moment. So another 4 or 5 years to go. So let's look at the entities who are involved in FSVP, the Foreign Supplier Verification Programme. Some important points to think about here. It's very important to understand who needs to register with FDA, and that often comes down to who is the last manufacturer, but quite often it can be the last 2 parties in the food supply chain. Then we have to think about who is the owner or consignee of a food product imported into the USA, because it's that person who is legally responsible for food safety and for implementing FSVP. So with that, the FDA, as part of the FSVP rule, defined a new term called the FSVP importer. And that is the person who they identify as being legally responsible for food products. Now, in most cases, it is the owner or consignee who's responsible for this law in the United States. Where there is no owner or consignee, for example, if you sell your product on Amazon or something similar to that, like an electronic platform, or where you're doing direct delivery to consumer, then you legally need to have what's called an FSVP agent. And that's really the core business of what US Import Agent does. So you can also be you can be an importer in the US and still use an agent because you don't have the resources in-house, or you don't want to do it, or you don't want to accept the legal responsibility. So you can outsource to an FSVP agent as well. So some other important points are who gets inspected. We're going to look at that a little bit later, and really who is affected by this, by these FDA enforcement activities. But as you can see on the left, there's a lot of people involved, ranging from the FDA themselves. Sometimes you may have a brand owner who does not manufacture the product but gets it co-manufactured, for example. And you have the importer, the agent, you've got storage and warehousing, and a bunch of other entities that may be involved, because every supply chain is different. So the key thing is that each situation may place different requirements on each party. So it's very important to understand this, and there are many people involved. So let's look on to clarify that a little bit more. So effectively, what we're saying here is that the FDA holds the US-based importer responsible, whoever that is, okay? So normally that will be your customer or an importer who's buying your product to distribute it, or it will be an FSVP agent. So the US importer is required by law to have a foreign supplier verification program plan in place for all foreign facilities that it is importing from. And that can also mean that the foreign facility, their supply chain may be under scrutiny as well. But the main people involved in this are the importer and the foreign facility. So let's look at what some of this means. So the term importer of record is normally the entity in the US that imports the goods. The owner or consignee is normally defined by the person who owns the goods or has paid for the goods. Okay, so these are all legally defined in the US laws. The FSVP importer, who may be different from the owner or consignee, is the entity responsible for food safety. But quite often it's the importer who's responsible for that food safety, unless they outsource this responsibility. And then you have the foreign facility, which is usually the last entity of processing or packing of food products in the foreign country, as far as the US is concerned. And all of this focus is on the FSVP importer and the foreign facility. So let's look at what this actually means. So foreign supplier verification program, the key requirements that you need to have in place are firstly that you have a CGMP plan in place covering training, hygiene, allergen control, temperature controls, and so on. Then you need to have a food safety plan in place, which covers off a hazard analysis. So this is HACCP or similar, or preventive controls hazard analysis. And to have preventive controls in place for those hazards, and also to have what's called process controls, allergen controls, and environmental controls. And you're also required to have supply chain controls in place and a recall plan. These are the key bullet points, the key headings that FSVP covers. And the important point is that all of this needs to be verified as part of an FSVP plan. Overall, FSVP is designed to ensure that foreign companies operate to the same standards as US companies are expected to operate to. So I hope that's clear. The real focus here is on food safety and making sure that these things are in place as part of an FSVP. So let's look at who must register with the FDA, because we see quite a lot of confusion around that, and it's worth clarifying that now. So registration is required for three main reasons. The first one, after 9/11, FDA registration was brought in, and its primary purpose at that time was to prevent bioterrorism incidents by knowing where the product food products are coming from. It's also, as part of FSMA, used to monitor and prevent food safety incidents and to understand where the food products are coming from in terms of traceability and so on. Excuse me 1 second. So this registration applies to anyone who manufactures food, processes food, packs or labels food, or holds food in any way. And being FDA compliant is really key to success in the US market, but it does require initial and ongoing work and investment. So this is not a paperwork exercise, and you'll find out why it's not a paperwork exercise a little bit later. It's a key thing to remember here that although the importer is the person legally responsible for FSVP and who is sanctioned, it's always the foreign supplier who loses out, because it's them that actually, it's them whose products are detained, and it's them who have to deal with the consequences of all of that. So it's very, very important when you engage with an importer or a customer in the US that you really understand if they are skilled up to carry out FSVP also. So why does it matter, and how is it enforced? So port of entry controls are a key way in which FSVP is enforced. There is every importer in the US, including agents like us, need to have what's called a DUNS number, and that DUNS number needs to be on your paperwork when it goes through customs, so that they can identify that you have someone responsible for FSVP. And the main way that they will enforce this is they will simply detain your product. If there's a problem with your product, if you don't have an FSVP importer, if your label's not quite right or whatever, then they will do what's called detention without physical examination. And that means then that you have to act, or your importer has to act, to get your product released. And this is where problems quite often occur. And we see this every single week. So DWPE is one of these typical FDA acronyms, but they've got a whole website related to DWPE, and they call it their red list. If your importer appears on the red list, then everything that they bring into the US is going to be detained without physical examination. But you don't need to be on the red list for DWPE to take place. Okay, so these are some really important parts, and to ensure that you're compliant, you need to make sure that your label is in the US format. There are laws around that, that you've got FSVP in place, and all of the other elements which I talked about earlier. Now, recently, the FSVP law came into force on May 31st, 2017, which is over 3 years ago now. And FDA always said at the beginning that what they would do is that they would educate before they enforce, educate before regulate. They're now past that point, and they're now starting to enforce quite rigorously. So this is not going to get easier. It's going to get tougher until the FDA are happy with the progress that everyone's making on this. The other thing that you have to really remember is that FDA is very much a digital regulator. They use a lot of data to make supply chain connections, and it starts with FDA registration. It goes on into things like DUNS numbers. So the importer requires a DUNS number, and that identifies the FSVP importer. The DUNS number is required for customs clearance, and it's used to track importers and foreign suppliers to connect supply chain information. So overall, FDA is getting more and more digital. They're now talking about using artificial intelligence and blockchain technology to track goods as they come into the US, where they've come from, where they're going to, and so on. So you're going to see a lot more about the digitization of FDA enforcement in future. So it's important that this can no longer be ignored. We have to really get up to speed with getting this in place. So how do they ensure compliance? Well, quite simply, they will use border inspections, but they will also inspect foreign facilities. And quite a lot of people don't realize that when they first go to register, as a foreign food facility. But right at the end of the registration process, there's a little checkbox there that says, I agree that by registering, I agree to an FDA inspection at their pleasure, basically. So who gets inspected? Foreign food facilities, dietary supplement facilities abroad, foreign packers and labelers, storage and distribution facilities, the US importer and the US FSVP agent, so us, in other words, we also get inspected, but it's a different kind of inspection. So, and of course they inspect US domestic facilities as well. Now, just to give you some numbers, there are 160,000 registered, FDA registered companies from outside the United States. So that's a lot of companies. And to be able to inspect them on any kind of frequency is going to be very difficult. So sometimes it might be a long time before you get inspected, but FDA will risk assess particular product categories, and they will literally land in an area and spend 2 weeks there, 3 weeks there, going around all of the FDA facilities in that area. So they do this routinely, and they closely work with US Customs and Border Control to decide on these things as well. So in terms of facility inspections, what can you expect? So ultimately, what I can tell you is FDA are very, very detailed when it comes to on-site facility inspections. These have been paused at the moment because of the COVID crisis and the travel restrictions and so on, but they are actually doing electronic inspections on paperwork and so on as a part of that. So just be aware that whilst COVID is going on, you may not get a physical inspection, but you may still be asked to do an electronic inspection where they want to look at your records and interview you about your products and food safety and so on. So it's important to be organized with this set of things. So most important, you know, if it's a facility inspection, it will be very thorough. Do not underestimate that. Now, ultimately, when the inspections happen, you need to understand what they're looking for. So as an importer, of course, they're looking for the FSVP plan and the assessment of the supplier and our evaluation of food safety controls of the supplier, allergen controls, labeling, and so on. So you can see the kinds of things that they're after. But notice this one at the bottom, evaluation of shipment records. They're also interested in making sure that the importer is doing their job in terms of continually monitoring the performance of the supplier from a food safety perspective. So FSVP is not something that you do once and then it's done. It's an ongoing activity that needs to take place. Now, from the importer's perspective, it's mainly about the records and the verification activities that take place. But sometimes the importer needs to go and do a physical inspection themselves at the foreign facility, particularly for high-risk foods and so on. Okay, so the consequences of non-compliance. If your importer is found to not have an FSVP plan in place, then the first stage is that they receive a warning letter. And that warning letter requires action. It requires usually time limited, 14 days, 28 days, depending on the severity of the issues. And it usually involves a lot of work, you know. So for example, if you don't have an FSVP plan, I can assure you this is not something you can do in 1 or 2 days. It's usually quite a lot of work to get that done. And we have structures to do that and consultants in place to assess these, but getting ready for FSVP might surprise you the amount of work that you might need to do. So it's important to not leave this to the last minute. Be organized and you know, work at this as part of the overall strategy. But ultimately, FDA like it when you get it right, and they want you to get it right. They're not there to get in the way. Their primary job is to protect US consumers. And you know, the critical points are: have a robust food safety plan, make sure your labels are compliant, and you have robust allergen controls. And remember, the allergens in the US are different from what they are in Europe, and so on. So you need to work with their allergen list, not yours. And ensure that the correct party is FDA registered, or you could find consignments stuck in the port. which after 2 or 3 days, the Customs and Borders Protection will start charging you, or the customs agent will start charging you storage for that. So be prepared and you know, just understand these things. So onto a little bit about COVID now. So COVID-19 has definitely impacted FDA's activities, but it's not stopped them. They're adapting like everyone else is adapting. They're working from home, they're doing Zoom calls, they're doing electronic activities to verify things, and so on. But for the short term, physical site inspections have been suspended. They've also lightened up a little bit on the labeling requirements, but that doesn't mean to say that they are turning a blind eye. If there are obvious violations of labeling laws, then they will detain and do detain products. So although the on-site inspections have been paused for the time being, it's pretty much business as usual. And because these guys are not traveling the world, they're at home doing electronic audits, and they're at the ports of entry, and they're doing more testing and sampling and so on, and they're still picking up on these things. So as the rest of the world is dealing with COVID, food companies also need to have reviews of their policies, you know, looking at the obvious, social distancing, protective equipment, but particularly reviewing personal hygiene on site and your policies with respect to COVID. You know, get some documentation in place. I've got some resources on this for you later, but this is an opportunity as much as anything else, because food companies and buyers also want to see that you're prepared for COVID. Only last week there was an incident of COVID virus being found on the packaging of chicken wings, frozen chicken wings in Mexico, New Zealand, and other countries. And so what that shows is that although so far there's no evidence that food is transmitting COVID, it can live on surfaces and therefore be transported into countries. And you know, they don't want this to happen. So you can be sure that FDA is looking at all of this and watching the developments, and they will be looking for companies to be prepared for COVID and so on. So like I say, I've got some resources on this for you in a moment. So as an FSVP agent, how can we help with all of this? So a US import agent, what we do is primarily we ensure that your product is safe and you've got the right systems in place. We take legal responsibility for your products in the US, so we have to be thorough when we are looking at your food safety systems and giving you advice on what you need to do. We also deal with FDA on your behalf if there are any issues. We are the primary point of contact for that. And we ensure that you remain FDA compliant. Of course, we're there to provide help and advice as well. We are staffed by a full team of PCQIs, which stands for Preventive Controls Qualified Individuals. So these people are all trained to the recognized FDA courses and so on. So you'll get a copy of this, these slides afterwards, and in each of these buttons here, there are various resources that you can use. And the full FSVP rule is here. We've got some frequently asked questions, FDA label guidance, along with a link to the COVID temporary label policy here, and the temporary COVID policy on inspections. There's a FDA inspection database, which is a great place to learn what they look for and the kind of things that they flag up. And here is a very good COVID checklist that you can use in your business from Cornell University in the United States. Really, really excellent document. And this section here is import alerts, where the detention without physical examination records are all stored, FDA dashboard, and some information on the FDA digital strategy. So these resources, there's a ton of resources, a ton of information there to really help guide you through what you need. And if you have any questions, of course, you can contact ourselves. And with that, I would like to say thank you to Carlos here, and I look forward to your questions during the panel. Okay, back over to you, Frances.
Thanks very much, James. Wow, Carlos is an exacting character that we should all be slightly nervous of, but we're in good hands with US Import Agent. Thank you for sharing your many pearls of wisdom. I noticed that we have Bonolo in the audience from Maunga Crafts, and Tsepiso, it would be great if you could unmute Bonolo, because I was hoping that Bonolo could share some practical lessons and reflections on what it's been like to go through the process of preparing to comply with food safety verification program requirements. I know Bonolo is working closely with US import agents on that process right now. Bonolo,
Good day, how are you, Francis? This is Yemi. I'm here with Bonolo. Working closely.
Yemi, unfortunately, your signal is not great.
We have been working the process with US import.
Yemi, your signal's not great. What I suggest is that we come back to you during the panel discussion. Hopefully we can sort out your connection there and hear your perspectives on meeting the FSVP requirements, because we'd love to hear from a firm that's actually going through the process and earning the stripes. So with that, I think we'll have to move to Jan now. Jan Forrest, as I mentioned, is working closely with USAID TradeHub to develop the AGOA toolkit. Jan, if you'd like to bring up your slides in the meanwhile. Bonolo and Yemi, if either of you can just drop me a private note in the chat just to let me know if you think the signal is resolved, and then we can give you a chance once Jan's finished with her presentation. And then just to mention, we are muting participants as they come into the session, but unfortunately it takes a few seconds for us to do so. So the occasional disturbance is as people join in. So good lesson for all of us: as you join a session, please mute straight away and come in muted so as not to disrupt things. And with that, please post your questions in the chat box. We'll be doing Q&A after Jan's presentation and after the panel discussion. Jan, over to you. Jan, you just need to unmute. We can see your slides.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
Perfect.
Sorry about that. So I would like to go over some basic information about US customs laws so that you could keep in mind things that you need to know before sending a shipment to the US. And then I'm going to follow that with a discussion about the specific requirements for the African Growth and Opportunity Act.
Jan, I
Yes.
think if you could just adjust your mic a little bit. It's not as clear as it was when we chatted earlier. That's much better.
Is that better? Okay.
100%.
All right.
Thanks.
Okay. So I'm helping the TradeHub to develop an AGOA toolkit. The idea for this toolkit is that trade promotion agencies and export firms can be trained to use the toolkit. The main part of it is a manual setting out all the requirements for US customs law and AGOA. And then also it will include some short briefers on specific subjects. I'll start with the documents that are required for US entry. They are the entry summary, which is called the 7501. A bill of lading is needed, and you have to have a bond for your shipment, commercial invoice, packing list, and other documents. Generally, these will be related to FDA requirements or other agency requirements. The link at the bottom will give you all kinds of customs forms if you're interested in looking at those. The first form is 7501, and this is very important. It has to be filled out very carefully. As an exporter, you don't fill out this form, but you need to make sure that whoever is acting as the importer or agent in the US does this properly, because a lot of problems can be caused when these are poorly done on the US side. There's a lot of information you need to enter: country of origin, the country it's coming from, the port it's going to, and then the part at the bottom is really important too. You need to list all of the merchandise and by HTS number. So if you have blouses and skirts, for instance, that would be two different lines on the invoice. You need the weight and quantity in units, and then the entered value, which I'll get to later, and the duty rate, which you obtain from looking at the tariff schedule, and then the sum of the entered value times the duty rate. This is a bill of lading, and this is the main purpose for this is to show that there was a contract for the shipper to bring the goods and deliver them to the consignee. And so this bill of lading has to be held by the freight forwarder and also by the consignee on the other end. This is the customs bond form. It's necessary. It's possible to have a single transaction bond for one entry, but generally importers will have a continuous bond for a period of time. And the reason for the bond is basically international practice now is to release goods as early as possible to try to speed up trade. This is recommended by the WCO and the WTO. And so in order to do that, customs needs to have a bond to cover any duties and fees that might become payable. So this customs bond allows them to release your goods very quickly. This is the commercial invoice. Customs does not require a specific form for the invoice, but this is just an example of something that would work. And again, it's very important to have a detailed product description with all the harmonized code numbers and quantities and value. I'm going to go now into the various steps required to enter into the US. The main things are to classify the merchandise properly, to value it properly, to determine its country of origin, and to determine its admissibility. And then finally, for AGOA imports, the AGOA eligibility. The correct classification number is needed because it will tell you whether the article is admissible, but mainly it will tell you the rate of duty that applies. And then it will also tell you whether the goods are eligible for preferences like AGOA. You might want to look at some of these links. It's very important to look at the latest version of the harmonized system. And that's what this link will take you to. And it changes many times over the course of a year. So it really is important to click on the current version of the tariff. The next link is to customs rulings, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then the third one is an online search tool that you might find useful. I wanted to stress the importance of looking at customs rulings. The link that I showed on the previous screen will bring you to this screen. And you basically go to the search box, and this is a way to find out what the disputes might be between importers and customs about classification, valuation, other things. And also it's a good way to start if you don't really know where your product should be classified, what chapter. So you can just put a word in there like basket, and it'll give you a list of rulings related to the classification of baskets, and it will give you an idea where in the tariff schedule you can find them. But the main purpose really, and what it's really good for, is identifying any issues that you need to be aware of where customs and importers have had disagreements. This is a page from the tariff schedule, and you can see that the heading, this is chapter 42, and the 4-digit number is the heading, and the subheading is 6 digits or 8 digits. When you look at the tariff schedule, you have to read it by starting at the item that's closest to the left side, the left line, and you have to, you first look at whether your product fits within that scope of goods. Then after that, you have to go to the next level of indentation, which in this case is handbags. And then you go to the another level of indentation, outer surface of leather or composition leather. And then finally, to find the correct duty rate, you go to the final indentation level. In this case, it's reptile leather or other than reptile leather. And you can see from here that what the duty rates are. And you can see from the D, the capital D in the special column, that this is eligible for AGOA. The rates of duty are general and special. The general rates are for most favored nation rates, which applies to most countries. The special rates apply to special trade programs like AGOA and GSP. And column 2 is for, right now it's only for North Korea and Cuba. So most countries do not get, are not subject to these high duty rates of column 2. I want to talk about a little bit about valuation. The preferred method is transaction value. And you can think of this as, well, it's officially the price paid or payable for the goods when exported to the US. But what this will mean is it is generally going to be the invoice price, and this will be generally a wholesale price. Okay, and some importers are not able to use the invoice price, such as related parties. If you've got a subsidiary of a company in the US, you might not be able to use related party price. There are some other methods that can be used in that case, and I list those down below. They're pretty self-explanatory, but deductive is you begin with the entered value of the goods, and you deduct certain items from that, whereas computed value, you begin with you add things to the value. Country of origin is very important. There are really 2 types of rules of origin. One is the non-preferential rules, and the basic rule here is that the country of origin is the country of manufacture, production, or growth of the item. This origin can be changed in a second country, but in order to do that, there has to be a substantial transformation in that next country. And that means a new article with a different name, character, and use is created. There are all kinds of rulings on how to define this, and also court cases. The non-preferential rules are used for determining whether most favored nation column 1 duty rates apply. And also a very important thing for the US is marking of the product with its country of origin. Every single article that comes into the US must be marked properly with its country of origin. The preferential rules are the ones that apply to things like GSP and AGOA. And these tend to be a combination of that general rule, country of manufacture, production, or growth, or where substantially transformed, plus a minimum value content. And generally this is 35%. And it means 35% of the appraised value of the goods. You determine the value content by adding the direct costs of processing in the beneficiary country and materials produced in that country. And the sum of those two things must be at least 35% of the value of the product when it crosses the border in the US. And that's called the appraised value. These are used for all kinds of preference programs, but the ones most relevant to you will be GSP and AGOA. There are also requirements with respect to admissibility of merchandise. Some goods are prohibited, not allowed to enter the US at all. And for those, the Customs Border Protection will deny entry at the border, and they'll seize the goods, and you may or may not be able to send them back. For restricted goods, this can be entered if you have a license or permit. And this is where you get involved with the other agencies like the FDA and the USDA in order to get the proper permit for crossing the border. So now I'd like to turn to AGOA. The law is based on the Generalized System of Preferences law. It's very similar, except for a couple of important things. GSP provides preference to 3,400 products from all kinds of countries all over the world. AGOA adds 1,800 products to those GSP products, but it only applies to African countries. And the products that are added are significant for Africa because, for example, GSP does not allow you to get preference for textiles and apparel. And that's been a big plus for the AGOA law in Africa because the duty rates on textiles and apparel can be extremely high, like 30%, 35%. And so getting a free entry of that product is really important. These are the things you must determine to see whether something is eligible for AGOA. The country has to be eligible. There's a note in the beginning of the tariff schedule that lists all of the countries eligible for AGOA. The product must be eligible. For this, you need to know how to classify the product. And then you look for that D, which I think I mentioned earlier. The special program indicator D is for AGOA. Textiles are treated very differently. They have their own rules and they appear in Chapter 98. And I won't get into those right now, but it's a completely different set of rules. The product has to be imported directly from Africa to the US. And that means it can't go through an intermediary country in Europe, for instance. It cannot enter the commerce of another country on its way to the US. And it also must meet all of the requirements of the origin rules. For non-textile products, these rules are, the first GSP rule must be grown, produced, or manufactured in the beneficiary country or substantially transformed in the beneficiary country. And substantial transformation is the creation of a new article, completely new article with a new use, and it cannot be merely combining or packaging operations. The sum of the direct costs of processing operations in the beneficiary country and the cost or value of the materials must equal at least 35% of the appraised value of the article. When you're looking at direct cost of processing, it's a very broad category. Lots and lots of things can count toward the 35%, including electricity at the factory and management costs and lots of things. So it's usually possible to figure out how to come up with 35%. There's a totally separate rule, as I said, set of rules for textiles, and they're in Chapter 98 of the tariff. And textiles are considered articles from Chapter 61 and 62, which are knitted wearing apparel and woven wearing apparel, and then scattered in other chapters, textile articles. In order to make an entry of textile or wearing apparel, you need to have more documents like a textile certificate of origin, and you need to have a visa stamp on the invoice. And that has to be done by the exporting country's customs service. And all of the countries are supposed to have a stamp to use for this. Sometimes they can't find it, and that's been a problem, but they all should be able to stamp your invoice with where the goods are coming from. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about how much AGOA is being used in the countries we're talking about. This is a slide that will show you primary products that have potential to be increased and for increased exports to the US under AGOA. And textiles and garments are always a big one because of the huge amount of duties that you can save, but not every country can produce textiles and garments. And there are lots of other products that also will give you duty-free entry. And some of these duties can also be fairly high, 10%, 15%, and things like that. And so it's going to make a big difference to a company to save those duties. And that'll be reflected in a lower price for the consumer generally. Now I have some slides showing the various countries and their imports under AGOA. As you will see, they're very low. This is Botswana. I don't think the data is there yet for 2018 and 2019, but the number from 2016 to 2017 decreased a lot under AGOA. Eswatini has had more exports, but theirs are also declining quite a bit. I think I'd like to talk about Lesotho and Botswana a little bit, because Botswana had a huge textile industry at one time, like 2009 to 2011, and they had an incentive program for manufacturers in Botswana, and that incentive program was taken away. And so lots and lots of manufacturers moved to Lesotho, where they could get incentive programs. So you'll see that the imports of textiles in Lesotho after 2011 are going to be much higher. And this is Malawi. Malawi is entering quite a bit of goods under AGOA. So they're taking advantage of a lot of the AGOA benefit. Some of the other countries, like Mozambique, Namibia, you can see that the numbers are very small for imports of AGOA eligible products. South Africa, of course, is very high, but that's kind of a different case. And so anyway, to summarize, there are many opportunities to use AGOA more than it's being used currently. There are lots of problems and challenges, the lack of information on the advantages of the program, and then the specifics as to how to qualify, how to fill out the documents properly, how to understand the tariff schedule so that you can take advantage of situations where there's a high duty rate for most countries and it's duty-free from AGOA. Also, there's some lack of structure in, for instance, the handicraft industry. And there is a big need in sub-Saharan Africa for investment in key sectors or parts of the value chain. There's a real need to set up value chains where more than one country is involved in the goods. The AGOA rules allow for accumulation of content from all sub-Saharan African countries. So that's very helpful. If you could set up something where materials come from Botswana and then they're produced in Malawi, you get to count all of that toward the 35% requirement. Also, it's a long way to the market, and the very high freight costs are another reason why things have not increased as much as one would hope. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Jan, for sharing such a range of background information around AGOA and some of the challenges and opportunities that exist in terms of really taking advantage of those trade preferences that we have in this part of the world. Golden has kindly offered to reach out to Yemi via telephone to get them on the call so that we can hear about their experience of FSVP and gearing up for that. So whilst Golden's doing that, let me introduce our other two panelists. First of all, well, this is so nice. I get to introduce my two good colleagues, good friends. Firstly, Cosmas Mamunzi. He's an international trade specialist with more than 20 years experience. He is the man I talk to when I have a question about any of the things that we've been covering today. He's my first point of call. He's been working with companies across SADC for many years to support them in terms of exporting to the US and taking advantage of AGOA. At the Hub, he's primarily responsible for supporting companies and other partners in Botswana, Malawi, and Namibia, but he also has a strong role to play in South Africa, supporting me as portfolio manager in this geography. Then it gives me great pleasure to introduce my other good friend and colleague, Sim Dube. He's also a portfolio manager at the USAID TradeHub, and he looks after Eswatini, Lesotho, and Mozambique. And Sim brings a further more than 20 years practical experience of working with business and in business, and also supporting projects in the development field. He's worked in different value chains, including textile and apparel, and supporting different exporters to take advantage of AGOA. And so both of them bring years of experience in terms of supporting companies in this process. And we're often not put on the stage. So I thought I would put them on the stage today to share some of their observations and reflections about what's happening in our space while we support this process. So Golden, do you...
Yemi is ready.
Super. So before we turn over to the panel, Yemi, I think the question was just from your perspective of going through some of the steps that James explained in quite a bit of depth. What are your reflections? What are some of the lessons? What would you share with other companies that are embarking on that?
Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. Good day, guys. It's the TradeHub. Good day, James.
Can you hear him?
No.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's a bit faint. Maybe you may want to speak up. Yes.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello?
I can hear you, but you are a bit faint. Let me try something else. Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, Francis, is that better? Yes.
Much
Go
better,
ahead,
thank
please.
you.
Go ahead.
Okay, good. Good day, everyone. As indicated, we've started working with the guys at US Import. It's been a very interesting process. As James said, it can come across as a bit daunting at first because there is a lot to it. So we started talking to them, I think, about last month. And he is right, it's a lot more than just filling out forms. FDA has this process for a reason, and the purpose is to keep consumers safe, but also to have a system that works for, in our case, exporters as well. So we have an opportunity to export to the US. We started talking to James last month. He was very friendly, very informative, brings a wealth of experience. I would say about a quarter of a century or so. And they have a system which really is a lot like training wheels to help people to get into the position to export. So as a qualified PCQI, I discussed everything with James from BRC, global food safety issues to HACCP, and we talked about what would be best for our firm as well as Maungo Craft. They offer a range of services from online software management for your supply chain to looking over your label to your nutritional panel to helping assess your HACCP plan and your GMP plan. There are a range of facilities that they offer. They even were so kind to help us in terms of the FDA facility registration. They were the ones who actually filled out the form for us, which I think they do the first time for the firm that they work with. Thereafterwards, they can help you with that as well. They won't have to pay. So actually, they helped us fill out the facility registration for free the first time around, which we're infinitely grateful for. So we're still working with them in terms of the other processes for label assessment and the plan assessment. But so far, it's been a great experience. They've been very helpful, very informative, broken down things to us so that it isn't such a daunting experience. And so, yeah, we've definitely enjoyed working with James so far and are looking forward to a bright future because in many ways, your FSVP import agent is actually a lot more like a partner than someone you're just simply employing to do work for you. So we're very grateful so far.
Thank you very, very much. It's great to have your perspective and feedback on the relationship. And I think just important to mention that the USAID TradeHub has a fixed life. And after we leave the market at the end of our program, we want to make sure that there are actors like US Import Agent and other firms that we work with that are connected into this network of high potential export firms and that can support this process. So we're really here to enable private sector to provide support whilst doing what we do. So thank you very much for sharing with us, Yemi. I've got a couple of questions to warm things up on the panel, but I don't want to take all of the thunder because I think there are a lot of questions coming through on the chat. Please keep sending them through. If we don't get through all of them, we will send written feedback on the questions afterwards, and we'll make sure that you get the answers you need. So for now, what I would like to ask Jan is, from your stakeholder engagements with all of the different trade promotion agencies and export firms that we engaged with during the AGOA toolkit development, what are some of the challenges that you observed that really stood out in terms of exporting to the US? I think you touched on some of them in the presentation, but I think they're quite key for us. Yeah.
Yeah, the biggest problems are actually related to quantity of goods. Any single country has a very hard time producing enough quantity to justify a shipment to the US. So there needs to be more regional cooperation in the region where various companies contribute to the value chain, and that would allow much greater quantities of these goods to be exported. Other challenges are the transportation costs, which can be very high, and the time it takes, and especially the time it takes to get to the US can be a problem for food products.
Great, thanks, Jan. James, the next question is for you. I think you touched on some of the changes in the environment that have resulted from COVID-19, but we also know that US-China trade relations are not easy, and all of this has caused the market to be disrupted to some extent. In the context of all of that change, from your point of view, what are some of the opportunities and challenges that are faced, or what opportunities are there for regional firms to take advantage of that, and what potential challenges are there in pursuing those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big issue for any business is getting customers, right? And, you know, and being able to sell product in your target market. Doing that in the US is possible, and it can be very lucrative. It's a very big market, but it's not easy, you know, and there are costs involved and so on as well. So my advice would be along 2 or 3 different channels. The first one is, as I mentioned in my presentation, spend the time up front to get your operations right, really understand what you need to do to be able to operate in that marketplace. Then you need to think about the channels, about go-to-market in the US. What, you know, where are those? What's the easiest way to get in the market? If you're fortunate enough to have products which can be sold on Amazon, for example, just getting an Amazon account is not enough. You know, you need to have someone who knows how to get your product to the top of the list so that you can sell in decent volumes to justify that. Otherwise, you end up just paying to store your product in an Amazon warehouse in the US, you know, so those are big things. The fact that you've got your systems in order is a big advantage, because believe me, a lot of importers in the US really don't know what they're doing with FDA compliance either, because this is all new to them as well. But it's the big challenge is that they've been trying to educate people around FDA for 2 or 3 years now, and they're mainly starting with importers in the US. But the real education is with the suppliers who are looking to export to the US. So, you know, educate yourself, really read into what's involved in this, and understand what you need to do to be able to comply in that marketplace. And that'll make things a lot easier going forward for when you do get a big importer or a distributor or and so on. You'll be able to get to market a lot quicker by having these things in place. But yeah, dietary supplements, there seems to be a lot, we're seeing a lot of people selling dietary supplements where they are the brand owner, for example, and they're having they're taking a dietary supplement product to someone else's formulation, branding that and selling it. And we're seeing the same with food products as well. So these are the sort of key observations that I'm seeing just now. But the market is open. People are trading. People are sending products to the US, and there is a market there. With the COVID side of things, you know, healthy type of products seem to be in demand, and having something that tells that kind of story would be very useful, just from a pure practicality perspective. But the biggest thing you can do is be organized, be informed, be educated on what you're expected to do, and do that day in, day out in your business.
Thanks, James. I think for me, what you're sort of emphasizing is that the compliance is one thing. It's almost like having your gym membership. But then you're in the gym, if you're unfit and you don't know what the machines do, you don't know if you should be doing aerobics or yoga or weightlifting, you really need to know what's going on in that environment. Even if you're compliant, it's not going to be enough. You need to know how to compete there. How your product's positioned in that market, and that's not something that other entities can do for you. They can support some of that, and you can certainly engage with a lot of partners on some of that, but part of it is really about that learning process of understanding the market really well. So thanks for emphasizing that. I want to maybe pose a question to Cos now. Because based on some of the changes that James has touched on as well, are you observing any specific emerging distribution channels or trends in the US market that you've noticed from here? And how is the USAID TradeHub positioned to take advantage of that, or to help firms to take advantage of that?
Thank you so much, Francis, and thanks to James and Jen. They've touched on some of the aspects already. But just to mention that there's been an increase in terms of use of e-commerce, online trading. Just to give an example, the US itself is the second largest e-commerce player in the world. And in 2019, about 365 billion is expected to have been sold via online platforms. But COVID actually accelerated the growth in terms of e-commerce. When COVID started, people were bulk buying, and after some time, people started to do online purchases. So there's been an increase in terms of use of online platforms. And it is important to note that, like James has indicated, it is important to note that e-commerce itself, like registering on Amazon, is not a silver bullet. It must be accompanied by a strong export strategy in place. Now, what is USAID TradeHub doing to facilitate that? So we are partnering with e-commerce management company to help companies from the region to list on Amazon, for example, which is the largest e-commerce platform in the US. So we've got a pilot exercise that we're pursuing, and the results from that are going to inform us in terms of moving forward. So that's one trend, the e-commerce route. Let me also mention private labeling. There's been also increase in terms of manufacturers in the US going the private labeling arrangement route with exporters from different areas. So in our case, in the case of USAID Southern Africa TradeHub, we've had at least 3 of firms that we've supported. They've managed to secure private labeling arrangements with US buyers. This is one trend that our exporters should not ignore. Right. Then another trend that has been witnessed on the US side is channels becoming more direct. In this case, so you have manufacturers that are avoiding the middlemen, trying to go direct to the retailer, for example. It's a trend that has been witnessed. And going forward, actually it has started. You notice that we used to traditional way of participating in trade shows, but now there's emergence of virtual trade shows. Even for those that have participated in the Summer Funds Food Show, for example, or even in the IFT show, for example, there's been a change. There's been a shift now towards virtual trade shows. I'll mention it at the end, though, that, for example, SFA is organizing a virtual trade show in September to replace the Summer Funds Food Show, which was an in-person trade event. So those are some of the trends, Francis, that are obtaining. I just wanted to add to what James has indicated around also effect on in terms of trade relations, the US trade relations with other countries like China, for example. We got some feedback from one company that is in the US to say that they got a specific instruction from their partners, their retailers that they work with, to say they should not receive ingredients from other markets. So this is an opportunity for Southern African suppliers to capitalize on supplying ingredients where space has been created. in a nutshell, Francis, those are some of the aspects, some of the aspects that have been witnessed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, because I have been part of this rapid change that's happened, and I think it really is advantageous for us to broaden some of the opportunities that are available in terms of linking, just by virtue of the fact that you don't have to travel. People can quickly jump onto a session and have contact with buyers, which is something which is quite difficult to visualize before. So I hear you. I want to move to Sim to kind of follow on that point of discussion, and to ask him from a trade promotion service provider point of view, that we and USAID TradeHub, in the role that we play in terms of trade promotion, what kind of observed changes have you seen in terms of the approaches to facilitating trade and linking buyers and suppliers?
Thank you very much, Francis. And once again, thank you to James and Jen for the great presentation. I think some of the issues have been touched by the speakers, but I think it's important to emphasize the point that's been mentioned by Cos, that we see a lot of changes. And COVID is actually, for us, has brought a lot of good things that we could not ordinarily envisage. A good thing that we've noted is where we're able to actually reach out to almost 90 people at one go, through our webinars that we're promoting right now. We were able to actually to share our knowledge with various different stakeholders that we could not meet before. So we've done this quite a lot, and we also currently we're talking to various stakeholders so that we get most of our suppliers getting into those trade shows. It's a cheaper way, and actually you actually have bigger reach. So there's so much going on that side of things. And because of the challenges that our stakeholders are having in linking up to the US market, we found out that with the kind of setup we have in the US, where we have specialists, market linkage specialists based in the US, we can actually get a company in Lesotho, for example, in Eswatini, to actually be able to speak to a buyer through the virtual means, through our specialists in the US. And what we've also seen is that there's also opportunities for other products that you can push through. A good example is maybe the initiative that we have with our PPE, our personal protective equipment exercise that we're doing in the region, where we've said, look, there's opportunities for companies that could not supply products, fashion products, to textile companies that could not support textile products to the market. And we said, look, why don't you diversify, look into PPE? And in that sense, we actually access markets on behalf of the suppliers, and also get them to be accredited through FDA, the registration for FDA, so that they can actually export products into the US. So those opportunities that ordinarily we could not see, but actually companies are surviving on those. So those are some of the things that we see, the changes that are coming through, and the positive changes, obviously, that we're actually seeing. I think that's what I can actually contribute at the moment, Francis. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm sorry I accidentally muted you instead of somebody else while you were mid-sentence. Not what I'm supposed to be doing.
Would you like me to repeat anything?
No. It was very brief. It was just sounded more like a distortion, I think. Thank you. Cos, back to you. For my last question for you, and Sim, I'll pose the same to you, is from having worked in this space for a while, supporting companies to enter the US market, what are some of the challenges and successes and lessons learned? So perhaps what are the challenges? How can they be overcome? What lessons have you garnered from working with export firms in terms of taking advantage of AGOA?
Thank you very much, Francis. So some of the challenges obviously have been touched by earlier presenters. But I would mention that lack of strategic partnerships with US-based actors is a challenge. So it covers, for example, inability to have strategic partnerships. For example, the ones that I've mentioned earlier, where there's partnership around private labeling, when one is a strategic partner in the US, it makes it much easier for a local partner to maneuver in the US side, because the exporter is now just focusing on producing, knowing that someone on the US side of things is handling the market, is handling the other costs. So that is one thing. Then the other challenge is to do with awareness. So awareness on two aspects. Generally, there is awareness that there is AGOA, but the processes, companies, exporters are not really informed around the processes and around the market entry requirements. It's good that USAID TradeHub is working with the likes of US Import Agent and Janet and other partners to make sure that exporters are informed in terms of what to expect and how to maneuver. But in terms of the process, I just wanted to give an example where exporters from the region are exporting products that are AGOA eligible, but they are not declared as AGOA eligible products. So it's a simple process whereby an exporter talks to their partner in the US, and so that when they do the declarations at the Customs and Border Protection, they actually declare that this is an AGOA eligible product. So what does it benefit the exporter? So the product becomes more competitive. And how does it benefit the importer? Obviously, it's more competitive and it's obtained much cheaper. So USAID TradeHub is partnering with the likes of US Import Agents, FFF Associates to cover ingredients, Albert Scott to cover e-commerce. So that's just briefly on the challenges. Some of them have been touched on by colleagues. But in terms of successes, or rather, I would start with the lessons, then I would touch successes later. So in terms of some of the lessons learned is that exporting anywhere, including to the US, it's not an easy process. There's a lot of investment that goes into the process, including time, including knowledge, including establishment of relationships. So just talking about time, what we have noticed that deals do not happen overnight. There's a lot of back and forth between exporters and the importer. Some of the deals that we have facilitated have taken place, culminated in a confirmed order and shipment 12 to 18 months after the first introduction. And also, it's very important that there is need for persistence from the part of the exporter. The prospective importers have got to develop trust. It's a trust game. We can't take that away from the process. It's a trust game. So companies that have participated in trade shows, it means you have to invest in more than 3 participation in succession. So if you participate in one trade show and you think you're gonna make a concluded deal right away, it's never that easy. So you have to be there, and the prospective buyers have got to develop trust. I just wanted to also mention that, Francis, that in the audience, that an exporter has to be information hungry, and has to be able to adapt. We've got companies that have participated in trade shows, for example. You are there, then you notice that, for example, you are packaging in a plastic bottle. Some of your product is very good, but it's packaged in a plastic bottle. But then you notice that no, the market requires glass bottles. So what does that mean? It means you have to adapt. Your packaging has to change. You have to meet what the market requires. So that's just briefly on the lessons. And in terms of successes, it's gratifying. Let me mention this, that it is gratifying to see first-time exporters first-time companies that have been to the US for the first time, participated in a trade show for the first time, actually get traction and start in successful engagements. Although it takes time, 12 to 18 months, but eventually they manage to export it to the US. So we have had companies obviously that have managed to export from the first engagement. Then we have got companies that we have linked. They haven't participated in trade shows, but it's just participating in buyer missions. A US company coming this side with prospective exporters, then eventually concluding in deals. So I thought those are some of the successes that I could share with the audience. Franz, thank you. Back to you.
Great, thanks very much, Cosmos. I think it's 4:30, so we've got half an hour left of our session. I'm going to give Sim a chance to respond a bit later to some of the other questions that are coming up in our chat box instead of giving him a chance to respond to that specific question. So Janet, the first question is for you, and it's quite a specific one. Given that South Africa is not a less developed country, the case is different. Could you expand on that, please? And you're on mute.
Yes. The big difference with South Africa is that among all of these countries that we're talking about, it's the only one that's not designated as a least developed country. And because of that, it's excluded from some of the textile preferences. One of the big preferences is the third country fabric rule, which allows a fabric to be imported from any country in the world, China, Pakistan, whatever, and made into wearing apparel in the beneficiary country, and it will qualify for AGOA. Normally, but that only applies to least developed countries. So South Africa does not get that benefit. That's really the biggest difference when it comes to textiles. It's not that they can't export textiles, they certainly can, but they can't, they have to think about where they get the fabric and how much they really need to get the fabric from sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that, Jan. Then the next one's also for you. Please, can you explain what is a visa stamp on the invoice?
Okay. Well, I'm hoping that anyone interested will come to the presentation next Monday, because that is going to be completely about textiles. And I will go into great detail showing what the visa stamp looks like and all kinds of things about the textile certificate of origin that you need for textiles and wearing apparel. But the visa stamp, it's really, I have a little story here because every country in sub-Saharan Africa has to have a visa stamp. They've applied with the US government to export wearing apparel and textiles. And so they originally had a visa stamp. Most of them originally got their stamp in 2003, but really, I came across a really interesting situation in Nigeria where I was helping a company to export their goods to the US using AGOA, and the goods were stopped at the border by customs. And when I talked to customs in Philadelphia, I think it was, they said that there was no stamp on the invoice. And that's when I began to find out about this whole situation where there must be a stamp on the invoice. It's a round circle that's in blue, and it'll have some information inside of the circle, but you cannot get wearing apparel or other textile products into the US without that stamp.
Great, thanks.
But I will be showing a picture of it next week.
Yes, thank you for promoting that. We'll talk more to that at the end of the session as well. Thank you, Jan. James, I think this one can go to you. What are the costs of being FDA registered from the manufacturer's side? For example, if you're a chili sauce processing company, and maybe if I can add on to that, perhaps how long is an FDA registration valid for? Thanks, James.
Sure. So well, with our firm, I can only talk for us. The cost of us doing your registration is $240 per year. Your registration is valid for 2 years, and it starts, and this is where FDA are just an incredible machine, but the way they do registrations is that they are renewed every 2 years on an even numbered year, right? So just let that sink in for a moment, but basically that means from December this year, you do your FDA registration, and then it's valid for 2 years. Where we're only doing a registration, we charge $240 per year for that to keep that up to date. And where you are using us as an FSVP agent, then we do that for free as part of your annual US import agent or US agent fee, which is also $240 a year. So you might as well get one of them for free kind of thing, working with us for that. The FSVP assessment that takes place is valid for 3 years. So it's important to remember that, and that is completely outside the FDA registration timescales and so on. So just remember that, you know, if you are investing in exporting to the United States, that your initial compliance costs, so to speak, are normally mainly in your first year, right? So it's valid for 3 years as long as nothing changes about the product, the process, or the suppliers that you're using. So again, it's important to really be prepared from the point of view that when you go to the US market, you've got everything sorted out, you've got your suppliers sorted, your processes sorted, and you know what you're going to market with, so that you do not incur future assessment costs because something has changed. So the other point I would like to make is around, if you are going to go to the market with e-commerce or Amazon or something like that, my advice is pick 1 or 2 products. Don't go with 5 products or 10 products, because it's going to cost you a lot in compliance costs up front. Start with your most likely product that's going to sell in the market, get that there, get it established, and then with the revenue from that, you can then invest in taking additional products to the market. Apart from all of that, it makes good business sense to be focused on one thing, one area, get success, validate that offer in the market, and then use the learning from that on your additional products that you go to market with. Sorry, was there another part of the question, Francis, or does that cover it?
No, I think you've covered that, James, and I think your advice in terms of, you know, going in with 1 or 2 products rather than going in with everything is something which I've observed as well. It's everything from labeling to potential FDA approval for the product. Everything just incrementally increases. And one way is, if you have the luxury of going to a trade show in the US, is really testing those products to test the US consumers' preferences and tastes, so that you can actually choose. You might have a great selling product in the South African market or the Southern African market, but it might not be the same in the US. So really use the trade events to test your consumer preferences for different products, if you have that opportunity.
Yep.
So there are a lot of questions about specific duties on specific products, and I don't think James and Janet have these at their fingertips for all of the thousands of products. So instead, I see that COSA has kindly shared a link of all the AGOA eligible products in the chat box, agoa.info, and also in the slides, which we will share with you. There are several links that Jan posted in her presentation that show the harmonized tariff system, and we can go and look those up. So I will not take all of those specific questions, but please feel free to ask us if you're struggling and if you need guidance or help to determine what kind of tariffs are normally charged or what duties there are on different products. There is a specific one around sugar and the quotas on sugar imports from Eswatini. Janet, I know you looked into that. The question is not so much about the quota, but more around how would one go about engaging with the US government to increase their quota. Do you want to take that one? A nice advocacy question there. You're on mute, sorry, Jen. Jen, you need to unmute, sorry. Oh no. Looks like something's going wrong. It's like unmuting and muting very quickly from what I can see. Maybe while you mull on that one, I'm going to...
Hi, Jen. Let me try unmute your mic for you.
Thank you. It's a Tapiso in action. Looks like we've got a bit of a glitch there. So just to give you an idea of the range of different products that we have questions about, processed soya, sugar, safety shoes. Yes, those are the three.
Oh, it's still muting and unmuting.
Looks like this. Jan, I'm wondering if you could just jump, maybe leave the call and then come back in, and let's just see if that sorts it out. And then while you're doing that, with some assistance from Tapiso, I am going to ask a question on James. I think this was actually posed to Janet, but I think you could take this one. In the event where air freight is used and there's a connecting flight, will that affect the eligibility?
In terms of eligibility, in terms of what?
AGOA. And sorry, if I'm putting you on the spot, maybe Kos or Sim could help there.
Yeah, I think that one's outside of my expertise when it comes to AGOA.
Okay, no problem. Kos? So I think the question is if there's transit of the product, if it's passing through somewhere en route to the US, how does that affect AGOA eligibility?
Right, so you find that there are products, there are shipments that are coming through South Africa from other countries in the region, from Eswatini, from Lesotho, passing through South Africa. So what needs to happen really is to make sure that the container is sealed from the place where it's coming from, and that it's not opened in en route. So it does not affect AGOA eligibility at all. If it's just passing and there's no processing that's taking place, for example, in this case within South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sim, I'm going to pose this one to you, but I think Kos could also come in here. How would one go about getting samples to potential customers in the US? In order to sell goods, we need customers, but before you can get a customer, you have to convince them to buy your goods, and this process might include sending samples, and it often does, indeed.
Thank you very much, Francis. Well, basically, maybe I'll just describe how we sort of work around that to help our stakeholders. What we basically do is we create the linkages between the buyer and the supplier, in this case, the person that's actually wanting to send the samples. And the conversation is between the two parties. And what would normally happen, obviously, is that in terms of sending the samples, it is normally at the seller's cost, or depending on what conversations they have with the buyer. And we don't really try and prescribe what happens on that side of things. And what most probably I would advise when it comes to such issues, especially if there's been an introduction from us, is maybe get hold of us. If we have a way of actually assisting to do that kind of work for you, we could actually help. But there's always ways of doing it, and we can always look at other people that have actually done exports before, find the best and most convenient way of sending products out to the market, especially for sampling. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sim. I see Jan is back. Kos, did you want to add to that? I saw you coming on stream there before I move to Jan. Any ideas on moving samples?
So exporting is a relationship process. It is a relationship building process. So like Sim has indicated, there are two options. Well, the exporter wants the business, so can take the bill in terms of covering the shipment of samples. I've seen some exporters though who would charge for their samples. They'll charge the buyer, and the buyer is also willing to pay for that. So these are things that, like Sim has indicated, they are a result of discussions between the buyer and the exporter.
So I suppose a big part of it is really just anticipating that as a substantial part of your marketing budget is really knowing that you're going to have to put some volumes aside, and you're going to have to cover the cost of shipping and getting product into the US for sampling. Jan, I see you back. Do you want to take the question on engaging with the US government on sugar quotas?
Yes, sugar is a big issue in the US. It's very protected, and it has been for, I don't know, 40, 50 or more years. So it's very difficult to export sugar to the US. And what's happening in most of these countries that we're talking about is that the sugar quotas are used up by large manufacturers. And it's not fair, and I'd be happy to look at whether there's anything that can be done about that. But these small countries just do not have much space for quota, and so they can't qualify. And so what happens then is, generally with sugar quotas, the duty rate becomes extremely high if you're outside of the quota.
Thanks, Jan. I think this question just requires a bit of some emphasis in terms of some of what you shared, if I understand it right. Are different countries earmarked for specific commodities to export to the US? Or is the opportunity open across the board to export any commodity as long as it's acceptable to the US? So I think it's really just talking
Yes.
Yeah, okay, go for it. Go, Jan.
Yeah, I would just say that there's no restriction on what product categories you can export to the US. The only real restriction is whether you can, reasonably provide it and enough quantity, and you want to look at the duty rate. There are all these other things that will get in the way of exporting a certain product to the US possibly, but the US does not have rules about who can export baskets or food or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So it's really around the trade preferences that are built into different agreements and how those can be taken advantage of. Okay, good.
Yeah, like for AGOA, there's a huge advantage for textiles and apparel, and that's why a lot of countries began there. But there also are a lot of opportunities for food processing and other parts of the tariff schedule.
Okay, thanks. Sim, I think this one's for you because it's from Andrew Fenwick. Are there any opportunities in the future for trade fairs once we're able to travel again? And I would just add on to that, also virtual trade shows in the apparel space.
Thank you, Andrew, for the question. Thank you, Francis. I think there's always, our objective is to create market linkages between potential suppliers and buyers, and we're always on the lookout to find newer and more novel ways of actually creating that kind of interaction. So as Francis said, currently, because of the COVID situation, we're obviously looking at doing virtual trade shows, but there's always going to be space to look at the actual physical trade shows going forward. They've been successful for us, and we just have to keep making sure that we improve on that and ensure that there's more linkages between the buyers and the sellers. So I think maybe in a nutshell, yes, we're looking at all the options to create the market opportunities for our suppliers and our partners.
Thanks. I think just to expand on that, at the moment, we are not planning on, shall we say, we're rather taking advantage of the virtual events and the opportunities that are available through those. And there are several which we'll talk to at the end of the session, including B2B linkage events. So I think it's important to gear up for that and make sure that you've got good photographs, if you've got a nice video of your company, a short introduction which really gives an essence of what your company does. There's a much higher reliance at the moment in this environment on having a good catalog, good marketing collateral that can promote your company through a virtual mechanism, and that you can respond to something quickly, an opportunity quickly. If you keep somebody waiting for a week or 2 weeks, the lead might go cold. So I think having that kind of collateral is something which we see even more than usual in the current environment. So just to build a bit on that. And there's a question here, Kos, which I think I'll pose to you. What assistance is available, I assume from the USAID TradeHub, in the form of grants for transportation and appointing an agent in the US? So maybe you could just expand in terms of where we have a small opportunity to provide some cost sharing as the USAID TradeHub, and where perhaps we have some limitations.
Thank you, Francis, and thanks for the question. So in terms of grants, we have got cost-sharing arrangements with prospective exporters. One area that we're looking at, for example, is on certification. We understand that there's need for companies to make sure they comply with US market entry requirements around certification. We cost sharing with exporters on that. And for example, we indicated that we're working with e-commerce management company to help our exporters get listed on Amazon. We cost share with the exporters on that. But in terms of shipment, we're not covering that at this stage. We're not covering, we're not assisting exporters to ship, to cover their logistical costs. Thanks.
Thank you, Kos. I think it's always useful to say what we don't or what we can't do. It sets the boundaries a bit more clearly. Then we've got a question, I think, James, if you could just recap briefly, what is an FSVP, Food Safety Verification Program agent? I think it's time to knock off. Yeah, if you could just recap on that. I know Nadia joined slightly late, but I think it's good just to clarify the role that the agent would actually play. Thanks.
Okay. So an FSVP agent is a US-based organization who takes legal responsibility for the safety of your products. So they become we become you in the US. That's what a US agent really does, for the purposes of ensuring the product is safe, for dealing with FDA, for any inquiries, queries that they've got. If you've got a detention, they'll often contact us first before they contact you. It might be a labeling issue. It might be the fact that they want to see information on the FSVP plan, or they want to see a certificate of analysis or something like that. So they'll often contact us first as the agent, and because we're responsible for your product while it's in the United States, and because we're responsible, we need to satisfy ourselves that your product is safe. So we do the FSVP assessment to check all of the food safety side of things, and that's all done online. We have experts who will look at your food safety plan, your documentation. They are going to ask some questions if there's anything that is not clear, for example. So a US agent basically becomes you for legal purposes in terms of the safety of your product, and we can also take that responsibility from a US-based importer as well. There needs to be, if you're dealing with an agent, there needs to be a document called a Statement of Consent, which is a legal document required if you do not have an owner or consignee in the US. It's a very short document, but it outlines what the responsibilities are of both the foreign supplier or the importer and the FSVP agent. So I hope that answers the question.
That's a great summary. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sadly going to have to stop there because we've got 8 minutes and I would like us to try and aim to end off in time. And we have a couple of things we still need to share with you. But there are lots of questions that have still come through and which are coming through. Please keep posting them. We are developing the AGOA toolkit, as I mentioned, and we are intending to put a frequently asked questions section in there. So it really helps us to understand what questions you're grappling with in terms of taking advantage of AGOA. Please keep posting them. We will get back to you with answers to your questions after the webinar. Just to confirm again, we will be sharing the presentations with you, both both Jan's presentation and James's presentation after the session. We will also be sharing a recording of the session with you. We just will do a few quick edits before we do that, so please just give us a week or so to do that. It takes a good 24 hours to render and load it up into YouTube as well, so you will get the link in due course. Then I would like to hand over to Cosmos. He's going to share a few next steps with you and future webinar opportunities and virtual event opportunities. And you can see the contact details for all our speakers on screen if you want to reach out to anyone. Thank you. Over to you, Cos. You're on mute, Cos. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you very much, Francis. So my role now is just to share a few next steps for post this webinar. So the starting point is that soon after the webinar, we are going to conduct a feedback survey. We encourage all participants to please attend to the survey. Attend to the survey, respond to us. It's helpful. It gives us guidance in terms of what else we need to do going forward. And already Francis has touched on unanswered questions. Due to time limitations, we are unable to attend to all questions. But like Francis indicated, we'll attend to them, and then we'll share responses with all the participants. Right. You have got the contact details of the speakers. We in each of the 8 countries that USAID TradeHub is focusing on, there are representatives there shown on the screen. So you've got Botswana, there's Herit, Eswatini, there's Tami, Lesotho, there's Marina, Malawi, there's Dagru, Mozambique, there's Honorata, Namibia, there's Charlie, South Africa, there's Francis, and in Zambia, there's Peter. We have got USAID TradeHub teams in each of these countries. Right, and then moving forward, we've got events that are coming up. So this is a part 1 of the 4-part series. So same time next week, we're going to, for the next, actually same time for the next 3 weeks, we're going to have similar events, but touching on different sectors. So I'll skip the 19th for now. On the 24th, which is next week, we'll have a similar event, but focusing on textiles and apparel, followed by a similar event on the 31st, focusing on food and beverage in partnership with Registrar Corp, Westgrow, and Test Africa, which are our key partners. And on the 3rd of September, we'll have an event focusing on food safety training in partnership with BSI Group. Right. Let me just quickly come back to what's happening on Wednesday, which is the 19th. We have got a B2B virtual trade show. We've been talking about virtual trade shows, replacing in-person trade shows. So we've got one which we are going to conduct in partnership with the African Agri Council. That's on the 19th. Then moving forward back to September, on September the 8th, we have got a webinar focusing on exporting cosmetics and beauty products to the United States. We will partner with the South African Consulate General in New York, Registrar Corp, which is also based in the US, and cosmetic exporters, Council of South Africa, Nancy in Namibia, as key partners, Secosa in South Africa as key partners. Then in terms of special foods, another virtual trade show is coming up, being organized by Special Food Association, who are the traditional organizers of the Winter Farms Food Show and the Summer Farms Food Show in the US, taking place on the from 21st to 24th of September. So as we get in more information, we'll share this with our partners, and we'll share this with our exporters. So let's make a date on these upcoming events. Over to you, Francis.
Thank you very much, Cosmos. Maybe just to emphasize that the event on Wednesday is in the specialty food and agricultural sector, and it is focused on South African imports. So unlike this discussion, which is focused on exporting to the US, Wednesday's session is very much focused on identifying South African buyers for regional exporters in the food and agriculture sector. So if you're in that sector and a producer or manufacturer in one of the 7 countries we work in outside of South Africa, then please join us for that. You can reach out to your country rep for the registration details. Then I do want to emphasize that all of the valuable webinars that we've been running, well, I hope they've been valuable. They seem to be from the feedback we're getting, can be accessed on our website. The videos and the presentations are there, so please visit our website to gain access to the past webinars. We had one on shipping procedures last week with lots of useful information on documents and processes to be followed. We've had one on handicraft exports to the US, so please go and check that out. Then I would like to now hand over to our Deputy Chief of Party, George Makore, to make some closing remarks. And I would like to take this opportunity to give a big thank you to my colleagues. I know I've moderated a couple of sessions now, and the people who are doing the work behind the scenes are not always seen. So a big thanks to our comms team, to Biso, to Mabatu, to the people dealing with registrations, surveys, harvesting questions. There's a big team working behind the scenes to make this happen. So a big thank you from my end to my colleagues. Over to you, George.
Thanks very much, Francis. Thanks to our presenters and the team that handled the discussion. Our presenters, Janet and James, as well as my colleagues there, Cosmos and Sim. Thanks very much for this session. I just want to reiterate the importance of this session and the idea behind it, which was mainly to help us navigate or have insight into how we can export to the US, mainly under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And I hope that this discussion did justice to that. But if you still have questions on anything, please feel free to contact the US TradeHub directly. You saw the contact details that were displayed there. We are here to work with you as we try to get as many exporters from the region as possible to have access to the lucrative US market. Again, I want to add the fact that in our efforts to get you to be acquainted with the system and also understand what needs to be done to get access to the US, we're going to continue to have other webinars as was outlined by Cosmos there. And Janet is actually working very hard to get as much information as possible available in a toolkit that we're going to be sharing with all of you so that my colleague Francis highlighted that we are a project, and as a project we have a lifespan. And when we get to the end of the lifespan of the project, we need to leave you with something that you can actually then be able to attend to and use in our absence. So those are some of the things that we continue to do, and we're continuing to be doing going forward. Also, there is a lot of resources and services that were highlighted during this discussion. I urge you to continue to look at it. When the information is sent to you, make sure that you go over it, and you will be surprised. You might have missed something, or you can actually develop an idea around it. and be able to give you the that spark that will get you to navigate this challenge or the challenges that you might face when you want to export to the US. In addition to what we discussed here, there's a lot of knowledge amongst ourselves and experience. Let's harvest that by continuing to interact with each other so that we have cross-pollination of ideas. And the question that you might have, you might be surprised to find that the person sitting next to you in this room can actually be able to give you the answer or provide the answer to that. In closing, I would like to thank everybody, especially our presenters and you for taking time to come and have this discussion with us. And I hope that you found this worth your while, and you will continue to attend our future programs as outlined earlier. With those words, I would like to thank you again and wish you a very good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening and a good day, Jan. James is in Scotland, so good evening to you too.